The alien cadets gathered in the towering, steel-plated training hall of the Orion War Academy, their eyes filled with a mixture of amusement and disdain. Rows of recruits from various species, some towering insectoids, others multi-limbed reptilians, watched as the human trainees jogged onto the training floor in perfect unison. Their dark, sweat-wicking uniforms clung to their bodies, their faces expressionless, their posture rigid. To the aliens, the humans looked stiff, mechanical, predictable. A low, chittering laughter spread among the Velksari recruits, their elongated mandibles clicking in rhythm. One of them, Cadet Zelna, turned to his comrades and sneered. "They call this drilling? This is mindless repetition. No adaptability. No strategy. These humans are nothing but metal dolls with guns." The Kargathians, hulking, rhino-skinned warriors, rumbled their approval. "I don't see what the High Command sees in them," one growled. "They act as if war is just a series of scripted movements." Across the training floor, Lieutenant Marshal Daniels, the human instructor, caught wind of the mockery but said nothing. Instead, he signaled to his cadets to proceed with their live-fire drills. Without hesitation, the human recruits shouldered their rifles and moved into formation with crisp, practiced efficiency. Their movements were like clockwork, each step taken in precise harmony. The aliens watching from the sidelines exchanged amused glances, expecting yet another display of tedious, programmed discipline. Then the ranged targets appeared. Daniels didn't call for practice rounds. He didn't warn them what was coming next. With a single wave of his hand, the firing range transformed. The floating drones that had previously simulated enemy soldiers suddenly flared to life, dodging and weaving unpredictably, shifting speeds and returning fire. Live rounds. The first shot from the drones cracked through the air like a whip, forcing one of the nearby alien recruits to flinch. The humans didn't react. Their formation held. Without a single order spoken, they adjusted, shifting their positioning in a way that seemed instinctive. One recruit, Cadet Hale, dove into cover, rolled onto his knee and fired a perfect burst into a drone's weak point. The machine exploded in midair. Then chaos erupted. More drones poured in from the ceiling, firing real, lethal ammunition. The human recruits didn't panic. They adapted. They moved. They became something the aliens had never seen before, an unpredictable, synchronized force responding to a real-time threat. One recruit ducked under incoming fire while another seamlessly moved into position to cover him. Another took a shot, missed, and adjusted instantly, compensating for the drone's erratic movement with terrifying precision. The alien cadets, who had been jeering moments ago, fell into stunned silence. Zelna's mandibles twitched as he watched the humans alter their movements mid-fight, adjusting to the enemy with an almost supernatural ability. "Impossible," he muttered. A Velksari beside him whispered, "That's not drilling. That's..." He hesitated, trying to find the right word. "That's instinct." The realization hit like a hammer. The humans weren't following some mindless, pre-programmed doctrine. Their drills weren't rigid, they were refined. Their formations weren't limitations. They were foundations, allowing them to move, shift, and react faster than anything the aliens had ever seen. Cadet Zelna's amusement turned to unease as he noticed something else. The humans were smiling. Not laughing, not jeering, not mocking. Smiling. As if they enjoyed it. As if this level of intensity, this near-death dance, was something they thrived in. The battle drill raged on. More drones descended, each one faster and more advanced than the last. The human recruits adapted on the fly. One by one, they took out their targets, moving like a single, cohesive unit, covering for each other, communicating with nothing more than a glance. There was no hesitation. No fear. Only instinct and execution. Then, with a final, synchronized volley, the last drone fell, smoking, to the ground. The training hall was silent. The alien cadets were silent. The only sound was the human recruits reloading their weapons in unison, as if this had been nothing more than another routine exercise. Lieutenant Daniels turned to the alien observers, his voice steady. "Still think human drills are a joke?" No one answered. Because in that moment, every single alien in the room understood one chilling truth. The humans hadn't been training to follow orders. They had been training to survive. And there was nothing more terrifying than a species that treated war as instinct. The silence in the training grounds was deafening. No one moved. The alien cadets, once laughing at the human drills, now stood frozen, their expressions a mixture of shock and fear. The smoking remains of the destroyed drone still crackled with residual energy from the explosive round that had ripped through its core. Sergeant Keller turned to the stunned group of recruits. His voice cut through the silence like a blade. That was live ammunition. Welcome to human training. There was no time for the aliens to process what they had just seen. The next phase of the exercise had already begun. The targets changed, shifting unpredictably, new drones activating and weaving through the battlefield like intelligent hunters. The environment itself transformed. Walls retracted into the floor, new barriers emerged, and the entire simulation took on the chaos of real combat. Next lesson, situational adaptability, Keller barked. If you want to survive on a battlefield, you don't get to stand there gawking. Move. The humans sprang into action. Their movements were fluid, precise, each soldier operating as part of a lethal machine. The aliens scrambled, trying to keep up. Karvek, still reeling from what he had witnessed, struggled to control his pulse rifle. His three-fingered hands shook as he tried to line up a shot. The targeting systems of his visor failed to lock onto the rapid-moving drones. Then the ground beneath him exploded. He was thrown backward, landing hard against a barricade. His vision blurred. A human soldier, Private Jansen, skidded into cover next to him, gripping him by the shoulder. "You're dead," Jansen said, glancing at the simulated kill notification flashing red on Karvek's armor. "You froze up. If this was a real battlefield, that would have been your last mistake." Karvek didn't respond. The simulation was relentless. He watched as another alien cadet, this one a towering, armored Threxian, tried to brute force his way through the drill, relying on his species' natural durability to tank damage. It didn't work. A human sniper, stationed high above the battlefield, fired a single round. The Threxian's armor registered a direct hit to his head. His screen went black. Simulation kill confirmed. One by one the aliens fell. The humans, however, adapted seamlessly. They communicated in rapid-fire bursts, using hand signals, quick commands, and an almost eerie sense of instinct. They covered one another's blind spots, moved in pairs, and laid down suppressing fire with mathematical efficiency. Karvek struggled to process what he was seeing. These weren't just trained soldiers. This was something else. This was war perfected. The alien cadets had trained in controlled environments. They had rehearsed for combat. But humans lived it. "Round 2 reset," Keller commanded. "I want every single one of you aliens to learn one thing today. Your instincts are wrong. Your species training is garbage. If you want to survive, you train like us." One of the alien cadets, a reptilian Slithar, hissed in frustration. "This is madness. We don't fight like you." Keller turned to face him, stepping forward until he was barely inches from the cadet's snout. "And that's why you lose." Another human soldier, Corporal Vasquez, shouted from behind cover. "You think the enemy cares about your training doctrine? You think they'll fight fair? No. You're up against species who will tear your guts out while you're still alive. You think a warrior race like the Drekkai will give you a chance to run simulations before they rip your skull from your spine?" The alien cadets had no response. Karvek clenched his fists. Everything in his life had told him that his people were advanced, that they had perfected battle strategies over centuries, that they didn't need to change. But now he saw the truth. They had been coddled. Keller took a step back. Lesson 3: Humans win because we assume we're already dead. We fight like there's no tomorrow because for us there usually isn't. Again. The battlefield reset. The simulation roared back to life. The aliens, still shaken, hesitated. The humans were already moving. And in that moment, Karvek realized the truth. The real war hadn't even started yet. Karvek gritted his teeth, gripping his rifle with renewed determination. He wouldn't die again. He wouldn't freeze. He wouldn't let these humans outmatch him so completely. The simulation roared to life once more, and this time Karvek moved. He dove behind cover, his 3 hearts pounding in his chest. He focused on his breathing just like his instructors had taught him, but this time he ignored the rigid doctrines drilled into his head back at the academy. The humans weren't fighting by any playbook. He wouldn't either. Across the battlefield, Sergeant Keller shouted commands, but they weren't orders in the way Karvek was used to. They weren't rigid directives dictating every action. They were broad, adaptable signals, allowing his soldiers to think for themselves. That was the difference. That was why humans won. Karvek watched them move, their cohesion effortless, their instincts razor-sharp. They anticipated threats before they even materialized, shifting positions and covering each other with an unspoken trust. The humans operated like a singular, living entity, each soldier an extension of the other. It was terrifying. It was effective. A warning siren blared. The battlefield changed again. This time it wasn't just drones. New threats emerged. Towering mechanical walkers, their simulated plasma cannons heating up, stomped onto the battlefield. Alien shock troopers, AI-controlled but terrifyingly aggressive, descended from drop pods, immediately opening fire. Final test, Keller announced, his voice dangerously calm. Survive. The battlefield exploded into chaos. Karvek barely had time to react before plasma fire tore past his cover, melting the ground where he had been crouched. He sprang up, instinctively dodging, but he wasn't fast enough. A round slammed into his shoulder, sending a simulated pain spike through his armor. His HUD flashed. Minor injury. Armor integrity at 72%. A human, Jansen, again, grabbed his arm and pulled him into cover before he could fully process what had happened. Stop thinking. Start fighting. Jansen snapped. He shoved a spare energy cell into Karvek's rifle. You're still waiting for someone to tell you what to do. There's no time for that. Karvek nodded, his mind racing. His species had always fought with careful, calculated tactics. But battle didn't wait for calculations. Keller's voice barked across the comms. Humans, execute adaptive fire teams. Aliens, figure it out or die. Karvek forced himself to act. He peeked over his cover, locked onto a charging shock trooper and fired. His first shot missed. His second hit center mass, but the enemy's armor absorbed the impact. His third shot went for the head. The trooper collapsed instantly. Karvek felt a rush of something unfamiliar. Not just survival, control. He wasn't reacting anymore. He was fighting. Across the battlefield, the human soldiers pushed forward. They didn't fight like soldiers following orders. They fought like predators. They weaved through enemy fire, used the environment dynamically, shifted formations on the fly. Karvek took it all in. He needed to adapt. Another drone locked onto him. Instead of freezing, he dove toward it, rolling into a crouch and firing upward at its underbelly. The round tore through the weak point. The drone dropped. He was panting, heart pounding, but something had changed. The fear was gone. Karvek spotted two alien cadets still huddled behind cover, paralyzed by indecision. The old Karvek might have been with them. But not anymore. He sprinted toward them, sliding into cover as plasma fire rained down around them. Get up. He roared. We fight now or we die. One of them, a lanky Afranian, shook his head, terrified. This isn't how we trained. We're supposed to wait for orders. Then you'll die waiting. Karvek grabbed the cadet by the shoulder and shoved him forward. Move. Cover fire now. The cadet hesitated, then fired. His shots weren't perfect, but they were enough to force the enemy back. The humans had already broken through the opposition's front lines. Karvek wasn't sure if they even realized they were leading the charge. They just moved, adapted, survived. He grinned. For the first time he understood. A final explosion rocked the battlefield. The last enemy drone fell. Then silence. The training simulation ended. The battlefield shimmered, the environment dissolving back into the pristine metal of the training facility. The smell of burning plasma faded, replaced by the cold sterility of the simulation room. Karvek collapsed to his knees, panting. He looked around. Most of the alien cadets were on the ground, either dead from the simulation or too exhausted to move. The humans? They were already standing, dusting themselves off, checking their weapons like they hadn't just gone through hell. Sergeant Keller walked forward, stopping in front of Karvek. He looked down at him, arms crossed. Now you get it. Karvek swallowed hard. He did. Humans weren't stronger. They weren't faster. They weren't more advanced. But they refused to lose. And that made them the deadliest warriors in the galaxy. The simulation ended, but Karvek's hearts were still hammering in his chest. Sweat dripped from his brow as the room's sterile lighting flickered back to normal. Around him, alien cadets remained on the floor, dazed, exhausted, or humiliated. The humans? They stood tall, murmuring amongst themselves, casually discussing their performance as if they hadn't just walked through hell and won. Karvek forced himself to his feet. His legs trembled, but he clenched his jaw, refusing to show weakness. He had survived. No, he had fought. And he had learned something his species had never taught him. War wasn't about perfect execution. It was about raw survival. Sergeant Keller's boots echoed through the chamber as he approached. His scarred face betrayed no emotion, but his eyes locked onto Karvek with an intensity that made his 3 hearts pound all over again. Better, Keller said at last. But not good enough. Karvek exhaled sharply. He had expected some kind of praise, some acknowledgement of the struggle he had just endured. Instead, Keller turned his gaze toward the rest of the cadets, most of whom were still gathering themselves, looking utterly defeated. This is why your kind loses wars, Keller announced, voice sharp as a blade. You rely on doctrine. You expect a perfect battlefield, predictable enemies, and absolute control. But war isn't clean. It's not a series of calculated steps. He took a slow step forward, letting his next words sink in. War is chaos. Silence. The alien cadets didn't dare speak. Keller's gaze snapped back to Karvek. What did you learn? Karvek swallowed hard. He knew the answer, but saying it aloud felt like an admission of something far greater than failure. It felt like an admission that his people had been wrong. But the truth burned inside him and he couldn't ignore it. We waited for orders, Karvek said, voice raw. You didn't. You adapted. Keller didn't blink. And? Karvek exhaled. You won. A flicker of something, approval maybe, passed through Keller's expression. But he didn't dwell on it. Instead, he turned on his heel and barked, reset the simulation. Run it again. The alien cadets stiffened. A few of them made sounds of protest, but they quickly silenced themselves. No one wanted to appear weak. No one wanted to be the one who quit. Karvek clenched his fists. He had barely survived the first round. His body ached. His nerves were shot. But deep down something stirred. He wasn't afraid anymore. He wanted to win. The simulation flared to life again. This time, Karvek moved first. The next 2 weeks were hell. Every day they fought through brutal simulations designed to push them past their limits. Environments changed rapidly. Urban combat one moment, zero-gravity assaults the next. Live fire drills replaced the training rounds, forcing the alien cadets to truly understand fear. And every time the humans moved like they were born for this. The alien cadets had to adapt or they were left behind. Karvek refused to be left behind. He forced himself to watch how the humans fought, not just what they did but how they thought. How they made split-second decisions. How they trusted their instincts. How they didn't hesitate. He stopped waiting for orders. He started thinking like them. By the end of the second week, Karvek wasn't the same soldier who had flinched at the sound of live rounds. He wasn't the same cadet who had mocked human training for being too reckless. He wasn't afraid to pull the trigger first. It all came to a head on the final day of training. Keller stood at the center of the briefing room, arms crossed. The entire squad, humans and aliens alike, stood before him, battle-worn, their armor scuffed, their expressions hardened. Final test. Keller's voice was unwavering. Real mission. Real stakes. Murmurs rippled through the alien cadets. Real? What did that mean? Karvek felt it in his bones. This wasn't a simulation. Keller's gaze swept over the squad, lingering on Karvek for only a moment before he continued. Pirate stronghold. They've been raiding council supply lines. Intel says they have hostages. He let the weight of those words settle before adding, this time no respawns. Karvek inhaled sharply. This was it. He turned his gaze toward the humans standing beside him. They weren't nervous. They weren't second-guessing themselves. They were ready. Karvek squared his shoulders. So was he. The real war was about to begin. The dropship rumbled as it cut through the void, the red glow of the combat lights casting eerie shadows across the soldiers' faces. Karvek tightened his grip on his rifle, feeling the familiar weight settle in his hands. No more simulations. No more second chances. This was real. Across from him, Sergeant Keller sat calmly, his helmet resting on his knee. The human soldiers next to him checked their weapons with a practiced ease, their expressions unreadable. Karvek had spent weeks training alongside them, watching how they operated, how they moved like a single, unstoppable force. Now he was part of it. The other alien cadets weren't as composed. Some still looked unsure, shifting nervously in their seats. Karvek understood their fear. He had felt it too back in the first live-fire drill. But that fear had burned away, replaced with something sharper. Resolve. Keller finally spoke, his voice cutting through the hum of the ship. Final approach. Target is a pirate outpost built into an asteroid. They're armed. They're expecting resistance. If you hesitate, you die. Karvek exhaled slowly. No hesitation. A voice crackled over the comms. 30 seconds to drop. The ramp began to lower, revealing the jagged rock of the asteroid below, its surface dotted with crude fortifications. Turrets rotated toward them. Bright flashes erupted from the ground, anti-air fire. The ship lurched violently. Someone cursed. Brace for combat drop. Keller barked. Then the green light flashed. Go time. Karvek hit the ground running. His boots slammed against the rock, the thin atmosphere barely slowing him down. Around him, the human soldiers spread out with surgical precision, already returning fire before the pirates could fully react. Explosions rocked the outpost. Shrapnel tore through the air. Karvek pressed against a jagged outcrop, scanning the battlefield. The pirates were disorganized, scrambling to return fire. They weren't trained. They relied on numbers, not strategy. That was their weakness. Keller's voice came through his comms. Push forward. Clear the first barricade. Karvek didn't wait for someone else to move. He surged forward, rifle up, pulse steady. A pirate popped up from behind a crate, raising a crude energy weapon. Karvek didn't think. He fired. The shot took the pirate down instantly. For a moment, Karvek just stood there, heart pounding. His first real kill. No simulations. No resets. Then he gritted his teeth and moved on. There was no time for hesitation. The battle raged through the outpost, the humans pressing forward with relentless efficiency. The alien cadets had no choice but to keep up. Some fell back on old habits, waiting for orders, hesitating. They died first. Karvek refused to be one of them. He moved like the humans, ducking between cover, reacting without waiting for permission. He spotted a sniper's nest above and didn't hesitate. He tossed a grenade, watching as the explosion tore through the position. Keller's voice crackled in. Good work, Karvek. Something in his chest swelled, but he pushed it down. The mission wasn't over. The deeper they pushed into the outpost, the fiercer the resistance became. The hostages were still inside, and time was running out. They reached the central compound, a reinforced structure at the heart of the base. Scans showed life signs inside. The hostages. But there was a problem. The pirates had locked down the entrance and were preparing to blow the entire structure rather than surrender. Karvek exchanged a look with Keller. No hesitation. No waiting. Action. I can breach it, Karvek said, surprising even himself. Keller studied him for a moment, then gave a sharp nod. Then do it. Karvek moved. He slung his rifle, grabbed a breaching charge, and sprinted forward while the humans covered him. Bullets whizzed past. One grazed his armor, but he didn't slow. Reaching the door, he slapped the charge onto the lock mechanism, setting the timer. 5 seconds. He dove for cover as the explosion rocked the compound. The doors ripped open. Time to finish this. The final battle inside the compound was brutal. The pirates fought with desperation, but the humans were faster, more coordinated, more ruthless. Karvek fought beside them, his rifle never still. He was no longer just an observer, no longer just a cadet learning from the humans. He was one of them. They reached the hostages, beaten but alive. The moment they were secured, Keller gave the final order. Finish it. No pirates were left standing when the humans walked out. The mission was a success. The drop ship carried them back to the fleet, the silence heavy with exhaustion. But there was something else in the air. Something unspoken. Karvek met Keller's gaze. The sergeant gave him a single nod. That was all the acknowledgement he needed. No hesitation. No waiting. No fear. He wasn't just an alien cadet anymore. He was a soldier. As the dropship docked with the fleet, Karvek unbuckled his harness and stood with the rest of the unit. The weight of battle still clung to his armor, the scent of burnt ozone and scorched metal lingering in the air. The adrenaline was fading, but his pulse still thrummed with an energy he had never known before. They stepped onto the deck in formation, weapons slung, helmets under their arms. The other alien cadets followed, their faces pale, their eyes filled with the kind of understanding that could only come from real combat. This wasn't a drill. It had never been a game. The simulations had given them a taste, but nothing compared to the sheer chaos of live battle. Of real death. A few of them had cracked under the pressure. Others had been too slow. The names of the fallen were already being etched into Karvek's mind. They would not be forgotten. As the unit marched toward debriefing, Keller slowed his pace until he was walking beside Karvek. You kept your head, the sergeant said without looking at him. Did what needed to be done. Karvek exhaled. It wasn't perfect. Keller snorted. It's never perfect. He finally turned to face him. You thought we were just being arrogant before. That our training was excessive. Karvek didn't deny it. I did. And now? He looked down at his hands. They weren't shaking. Not like some of the others. He thought about the first time he had seen the human drills, the way he had laughed along with the other cadets at the brutality of their training. Now he understood. Now he knew why they trained that way. He knew. I was wrong, Karvek said. You weren't preparing for war. He met Keller's gaze. You were preparing to survive it. The sergeant's lips curled in something that might have been approval. Welcome to the real world, soldier. The debrief was long. Tactical breakdowns, casualty reports, efficiency reviews. The officers barely spared a glance at the alien cadets. Their performance spoke for itself. Some had failed. Others had barely passed. Karvek had earned his place. By the time it was over, exhaustion dragged at his limbs. He wanted sleep, but as he moved to return to his quarters, Keller stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. Mess hall. Now. Karvek hesitated. You want to be part of the unit or not? He stiffened, then nodded. Keller smirked and led him down the corridor. The mess hall was alive. Human soldiers filled the space, some laughing, some drinking, others quiet in their own thoughts. There was no grand celebration, no extravagant ceremony. Just men and women who had walked through hell together and come out the other side. A few glanced up as Karvek entered, eyes measuring. He felt the weight of those stares. Not hostile, just watching. Keller led him to a table, dropping into a seat. Sit. Karvek sat. A drink was slid in front of him. Not alcohol, a protein shake, thick and heavy. Keller raised his cup. To the ones who didn't make it. Around the table, the other soldiers raised theirs as well. Karvek did the same. They drank. Silence settled for a long moment. Then someone nudged him. One of the younger soldiers grinned. You're still too damn stiff, lizard. Karvek blinked. I'm not a lizard. That got a round of laughter. You'll fit in just fine, Keller muttered. Karvek didn't smile. He didn't quite know how to respond. But he felt it. For the first time, he wasn't an outsider. He wasn't just an alien cadet playing at war. He had fought. He had bled. And now, sitting among them, he understood what the drills had been preparing them for. Not war. Not glory. Survival. He picked up his cup again, thoughtful. Maybe, just maybe, he was one of them now. If you don't want to miss out on more mind-blowing HFY stories, make sure you're subscribed. You never know when the next legendary tale drops.